out some of the verses from chapter 11 in particular. We saw Joshua's, this was a map of the northern conquest. Joshua's faithfulness was called out in Joshua 11:15. Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, his servant, so Moses commanded Joshua, and so Joshua did. He left nothing undone of all the things the Lord had commanded Moses. Again, we see this very clear chain of command that carried on past Moses' death as well. His instructions through God's instructions through Moses were still being honored in the book of Joshua. We also saw how the Lord hardened the hearts of the Canaanites so that they would come out and battle the Israelites to their destruction. This was Joshua 11:20, and again, this harkens back to the time of Pharaoh and the plagues, and how he was hardening his heart, and then God started doing it for him. But we also saw how that came in the conquest of the Transjordan, east of the Jordan. Some of the language from Numbers also has this connotation with it of the Lord hardening their hearts. And yes, that's what we also talked about. Oh, right after this. There's this great transitionary verse as well, Joshua 11:23, and the land had rest from war. So after Joshua 11, we're going to be talking more about the distribution of the lands. But then we get into a review in chapters 12 and 13 of Joshua about some of these lands. We looked at the conquest east of the Jordan, and it said in Joshua 12:6, Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave their land for possession to the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, the 2.5 tribes east of the Jordan. And then we looked at west of the Jordan, all the kings west of the Jordan that were a part of the conquest that Joshua are attributed to Joshua's leadership. And you can see a number of those city-states marked on the map, with some 31 in all. We looked at kind of the boundary given for the Promised Land. God lays this out. He lays out his design for the conquest in Deuteronomy and in Numbers. And in Numbers 34, you can read about that boundary. And then we were looking at the verses in Joshua 13, where God tells Joshua there are still lands to be conquered. And so I kind of made a very rough sketch of what I think that land is. Some land to the south, a lot of land to the north. We pointed out Tyre and Sidon way up there. I don't think they were ever part of the conquered land. And then the coastal land, a lot of that belonging to the Philistines. And so we were asking ourselves, I was asking myself, I'm like, what's the story here? How can we make sense of this? Adam brought this one up. This is Deuteronomy 7:22. So why didn't all this conquest just take place at once during Joshua's time? Deuteronomy 7:22, the Lord your God will clear away these nations before you little by little. You may not make an end of them at once, lest the wild beasts grow too numerous for you. So it was God's design that it would be little by little, that it seems like from the context of this verse that it would also be healthier for the land, so it's not getting a little too overrun with just nature at that point. But after class, Richard Jewell pointed out the passage I was looking for, which I love that. I think that's great. Let's take a look at Judges chapter 3, because I think this puts a good bow on what we talked about last week. Judges chapter 3, and I'll read verses 1 through 6, and it will give us the answer why this didn't all happen during Joshua's time as leader. Now, these are the nations that the Lord left to test Israel by them. That is, all in Israel who had not experienced all the wars in Canaan. It was only in order that the generations of the people of Israel might know war, to teach war to those who had not known it before. These are the nations, the 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonians, and the Hivites, who lived on Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon as far as Lebo Hamath. They were for the testing of Israel, to know whether Israel would obey the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. So the people lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And their daughters they took to themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and as a consequence, and they served other gods. So this was a couple of things that God still had in mind here. This was a test for Israel. It was supposed to teach the next generation warfare, and I would assume that would also be like how to defend themselves. But also in verse 4, it was supposed to be a testing for their obedience, that they would obey the commandment to drive these people out. And instead, they integrated with them, and it was to their detriment. And it's going to be to their detriment in the book of Judges. It starts off a terrible downward spiral that just keeps going round and round. So that's the passage I was looking for last week, and I really appreciate Richard Jewell pointing that out to me. Okay, so in the next several chapters, we're going to review the allotment of the lands to the tribes, but first tonight, we're going to talk about the man with a different spirit. So it's 40 years before the conquest, and the Israelites, we find them again in the Sinai Peninsula. It's a wilderness area. They're in eastern Sinai, but it's rocky, it's desolate, there's little vegetation, maybe some scattered brush. Let's all turn to Numbers chapter 13, because we're going to go through this chapter together. Numbers 13. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all the men who were heads of the people of Israel. Okay, so it's the Lord that gives the order to send out the spies into the promised land. And this is where we end up singing the song, right? 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad and 2 were good. But we'll get there in a second. So in verses 4 through 15, they list off all the different leaders from the different tribes. I'll just call out that it's Joshua from the tribe of Ephraim, and it's Caleb from the tribe of Judah. Caleb says in Joshua 14:7 that he was 40 years old at this time, and I imagine Joshua is right around that age too. Seems safe enough to assume. Let's skip forward to verse 17 of Numbers 13. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up into the Negeb and go into the hill country and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not." It's a lot of weathers. "Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. Okay, so they're supposed to go out and spy everything about the land. Tell me about the people. Tell me about how they live. Tell me about the vegetation. I think it's interesting, again, this is Moses that gives the exact directives, but this is at the direction of God. God wants them to go and take a look. Almost sounds like another test. So they go through the land. Here's one possible route that they might have taken, but seems to fit. It says they go all the way from Zin all the way up to Lebo Hamath. They cut down a cluster of grapes. They carry it between them on a pole. I'm hoping that's on the way back, because if you look at the scale here, it's a pretty long journey. It could be that they could have ended up covering some 400 or 500 miles in a 40-day trip, which I kind of did the math. It could be like 10 to 20 miles a day. I mean, it would have been a hike. These are some stout people, I guess. They're strong. So after 40 days, and again, such a biblical time frame, the spies return. They report to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation on what they saw. And they also gave some of the fruit. But while they're doing this, they call out how big and strong the people of the land are. Let's take a look at, starting in verse 28. "However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan." Verse 30 of Numbers 13. "But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, 'Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it.' Then the men who had gone up with him said, 'We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are.'" Okay, so this is our first chance to see Caleb's leadership, but also his courage. It's hard to stand up in front of everyone, I know, and to quiet them down. Actually, you guys did pretty well tonight on that account. And he tells them, let's go get it. You can definitely see a real go-get-'em approach to Caleb here. Caleb says, we are able to go up and occupy it. I think that's interesting. I kind of like, Monday morning quarterback this. I'm like, why doesn't he say we're able to do this with the Lord's help? But you can tell that confidence, and we'll see that is coming. This is how Caleb operates, though. I mean, he's a go-getter. He's a man of action, like we're going to see. He carries himself with confidence, and God never seems to have a problem with that. He's okay with people acting in faith. Let's keep reading. Verse 32. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seem to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seem to them. This is one of those great introspection passages, I guess, of the Bible. I don't know, for myself, there are times where I definitely feel like a grasshopper in my own sight. And so I can kind of put myself in their position. But what's the problem with this? The problem is, there's two problems. First of all, Proverbs 23:7, the first part of that in the New King James, for as he thinks in his heart, so he is. And the other problem is, who are they focused on? They're focused on themselves. I think about that song, my God is so big. I must be all about the kids' songs tonight. My God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing my God cannot do. If they only knew that song, that might have seen them through this one. But instead, they're, I am so small, these guys are so big, there's nothing that I can do. Kind of switched it around. So this is an amazing verse. It gives amazing insight into these leaders. They're clearly having a crisis of faith. They're focusing on themselves and their ability instead of God. And but at the same time, who doesn't see himself as a grasshopper? Caleb. He absolutely doesn't come across as someone who feels like he's, yay tall against these guys. So in Numbers 14, of course, this all spills over. The Israelites in the wilderness do what the Israelites in the wilderness do. They grumble and they look back to Egypt. In fact, in verse 4, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. They're ready. They're at the door of the promised land, and they're ready to go back. Let's take a look at verse 5 of Numbers 14. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel, the land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones, but the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. Okay, so Joshua and Caleb, they stand up in front of this mob, and they appeal to them, and we do see this shift here. The focus is on the Lord. If the Lord delights in us, he will give us this land, if the Lord is with us. So how do the people respond? They go from being fearful to being angry, and they want to stone them. But God saves them. God saves Joshua and Caleb by appearing in his glory at the tent of meeting. And I can only imagine exactly what that looks like. When I think of glory, I think of like a bright, shining light, but it's something, again, that they can't approach. It's like, whoa, like kind of back off moment. Weren't we talking about that in the sermon on Sunday? About a light, resisting the light? Anyway, sounds familiar. Notice God's reaction here in verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me, in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. So it's interesting. You see here a relationship between a lack of faith, a lack of disbelief, to God. He's also seeing that they just flat out despise him at this point. And again, they're ready to go back to Egypt and to all that means. I don't know. You can kind of really sense God's frustration here. It's like, what's wrong with these people? So what happens? In the next couple of verses after that, Moses is going to appeal to God's steadfast love. In verse 18, he's going to repeat back to God his description of himself from Exodus 34. Let's take a look at verse 20. Skip it down to verse 20. Then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. And none of those who despise me shall see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit, and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. Now, since the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valleys, turn tomorrow and set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea. Okay, so God promises that everyone over the age of 20, except for Caleb and Joshua, will not into the land. And let's see. Yeah, and we called out verse 23 as well. I think we see, actually that's not 23. I'm sorry. Look at verse 33. Verse 33. And your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness, until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness. This also kind of harkens back a couple lessons ago. We were talking about the sins of the parents. They're not inherited by the children, but the consequences certainly are. And that's called out in this verse for the Israelites. The children of this faithless generation, they're going to suffer for wandering for 40 years as well. So were Joshua and Caleb. So I think we see a similar principle here. So let me summarize what else happens here at the end. The Lord kills the 10 unfaithful spies with the plague. That's verse 37. I'd forgotten about that. Then the Israelites, they go, oh, whoa, we messed up. We sinned. We're going to actually go and try and get into the promised land after all. And Moses goes like, just don't, right? Moses says, why now are you transgressing the command of the Lord? This is verse 41. Do not go up, for the Lord is not among you. What do? Verse 44, but they presumed to go up to the heights of the hill country, although neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses departed out of the camp. Verse 45, then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that land in the hill country came down and defeated them, pursued them, even to Hormah. So the ark isn't going with them. Moses isn't going with them. They're trying to recover the situation, but they're just in a hole, and they keep on digging. They're making it worse. Okay, and it's a reminder again. It's a reminder that God would eventually defeat the Canaanites. The Israelites are not able to do so. If God had been with them, they would have been able to enter the promised land at this time, but He wasn't, and they weren't. So 40 years in the wilderness. That's a long time. It's longer than I've been alive. And I have to wonder what Caleb was like in these 40 years. There's nothing really said of him at this time, at least not that I found. You have to wonder, did Caleb struggle with bitterness? I think if he was perpetually grumpy for 40 years, we could kind of understand, right? It's like, right there. Let's turn on over to Joshua chapter 14. So now we get to, that's kind of all setting up for where we're at in Joshua. Joshua chapter 14. So 45 years after the spies enter the land, and the conquest of Canaan is now winding down. There is still a warrior in Israel, and he's ready to realize his inheritance in the promised land. Let's take a look at Joshua 14. We're going to start in verse 6. Then the people of Judah came to Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know that the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, in Kadesh Barnea, concerning you and me, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. And I brought him word again, as it was in my heart. For my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord your my God. And now behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years since the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now behold, I am this day 85 years old. I am still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. So now give me this hill country, of which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there, with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said. Then Joshua blessed him, and gave Hebron to Caleb the son of Jephunneh for an inheritance. Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb the son of Jephunneh, the Canaanite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. Now the name of Hebron formerly was Kiriath Arba. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, and the land had rest from war. Okay, so Caleb requests land in Judah, and this makes sense because he's a tribal leader of Judah. And what does Caleb ask for? Well, he wants to go and fight the Anakim. These are the very people that these unfaithful spies were afraid of. But I also notice now in Joshua 14, Caleb's language is totally focused on the Lord, and it's focused on his faithfulness to the Lord this entire time. He's 85 years young now, and God has kept him alive and strong. He's still ready to conquer and fight giants and fortified cities in the name of the Lord. And he's still holding on to God's promises after 45 years. And that's a great encouragement to us today. It'd be easy for him to get discouraged along the way. After all those years, it'd be easy for him to say, I don't think this is ever going to happen. But instead, it seems like time has strengthened his faith and strengthened his resolve rather than diminishing it. And he has granted Hebron, the city of Abram, that he settled and made an altar to the Lord when God was making covenants with Abram and Abraham back in Genesis. But we're not done with Caleb just yet. In fact, let's look on over in chapter 15. He's granted that land, and now he's going for it. Joshua 15, starting in verse 13. According to the commandment of the Lord to Joshua, he gave to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, a portion among the people of Judah, Kiriath Arba, that is, Hebron. Arba was the father of Anak. And Caleb drove out from there the three sons of Anak, Sheshai and Ahiman and Talmai, the descendants of Anak. And he went up from there against the inhabitants of Debir. Now the name of Debir formerly was Kiriath Sepher. And Caleb said, whoever strikes Kiriath Sepher and captures it, to him will I give Achsah my daughter as wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, the brother of Caleb, captured it. And he gave it to Achsah his daughter as wife. He gave him. When she came to him, she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she got off her donkey, and Caleb said to her, what do you want? She said to him, give me a blessing, since you have given me the land of the Negeb. Give me also springs of water. And he gave her the upper springs and the lower springs. Okay, there's a lot going on there. First of all, Caleb drives out the Anakim from Hebron, and this was Kiriath Arba, and then he goes up to Debir. By the way, I had to look up Kiriath just because it was in here twice. I'm like, what does that mean? Kiriath means city of, so city of Arba, city of Sephir. Kind of like Beth as well, but I don't know if that's a different language, like Bethel is the house of God, house, city. Anyway, he promises to give his daughter in marriage to whoever captures the city. His nephew Othniel takes him up on that. Now it seems like Caleb's daughter, Achsah, has some of the same ambitions as her father. She wants some land, and the ESV rendering in verse 18 kind of had me playing the pronoun game. I'm trying to figure out who he and him is. But it seems to indicate that Achsah convinces her husband to ask Caleb for land, and then she asks for a blessing of springs of water as well, which he grants. I get the impression of, Othniel is sealing the deal of this field, and she's riding up on the donkey, and she's like, hey, how about some water as well? So this account in verses 13 through 19, it's repeated verbatim in Judges 1, 11 through 15. I think it's the same text. Again, I had to ask myself why. The first couple chapters in Judges, they're going to deal with the continuation of the conquest. We see a lot of that responsibility is going to shift from a central leader in Joshua to the individual tribes working in their territory. And this narrative fits in there as well. I think that's kind of why I was going to say copy and pasted there. It's programmer think again. So as Caleb's land is part of the inheritance of Judah, it kind of fits both narratives. It fits here in the allotment of the land and also in Judges. Okay, so what do we make of Caleb? What are some things we can learn from this man and his faith? Let's go back to that verse in Numbers chapter 14. Caleb's a man with a different spirit. So different from whom? I think he's different from the people of his time, of his age, from his contemporaries. Different how? Well, the verse kind of gives us that too in the context. And has followed me fully. I think this is still applicable for us today. Total commitment to God will make us different from those around us. But when I see this verse, I also think that there are different members of the body of Christ. I think about the passages in 1 Corinthians 12. That sometimes someone might be a little bit different from us, but we're both in the same body together. I think in some ways Caleb was different. He had a different spirit from Joshua even. And that's all right. And that's something to keep in mind. Very often it's easy for us to say, well, you're too different from me for us to fellowship. It's not that we actually say that out loud, but maybe we think that way. I've heard described sometimes as like you have your thinkers, those that would rather read and study the Word, and you have your feelers. And sometimes those groups don't always mix too well, but we need each other. So I think we need those in the church who are different from us in a different spirit. Maybe that's taking it a bit more broadly than the verse implies, because it does seem to be focused on he's different because he faithfully followed God. But I wanted to call that out too. He also has a different spirit because he's still standing patiently on the promises of God. After 45 years, he's still thinking about what God has promised him. I'm reminded of what Paul says in Galatians 6:9. Let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap if we do not give up. Caleb was a guy, even after 45 years, he wasn't just ready to retire. He wasn't just ready to, give me some of that nice land down by the Jordan and I'll pull up a lawn chair. He was still ready to go forward, even after 45 years. I think it's a great encouragement for us today. Caleb was a man who was ready to act. He's a man of action, not just ready to, let someone else go and do the work. But in the account of Debir, he's also willing to ask for help. I'm not sure what his motivation was there. I don't know if fighting for Hebron took too much out of him. I should call out, he says this hill country, I think the New King James says, give me this mountain. And maybe to them it was like a mountain. It's you're going from basically beneath sea level at Jericho, at the Jordan, to something like 3,300 feet up to Hebron from what I was seeing. So it was just even a hike to get up there, and it's a highland, and as it's described, it's also fortified. So I don't know if that took too much out of him, or maybe he just wanted to get his daughter married, I'm not sure. But he was going to ask for help in conquering Debir. Maybe he wants also other people to step up and fight as well. So those are some of my thoughts, observations about Caleb. I wanted to open it up for you all in case there was anything I missed or anything about Caleb that really sticks out to you. Yeah. Me, you, me? I'll go for it. One way or the other, we'll get you a microphone. Kind of in between. Thanks.
Just, I see, in going back to chapter 11 of Joshua, I think it's interesting in the NASB where it has a little note there, verse 20, where going back to the idea of how God kind of at times will harden people's hearts, right?
Yeah.
We know that Pharaoh, his heart was hardened eventually because he showed a pattern of being obstinate, not listening to what God was trying to have him do. Mm-hmm. We see that these cities that did not want to follow God, obviously, it says here that for it was of the Lord to harden their hearts, but there's a note here that says, or make strong their hearts. So in this case, you've got these cities who maybe God saw that, well, they're not going to follow me. We need them to go into battle against Israel, be courageous kind of thing. Their actions prior caused God to put their heart in a state where they were courageous maybe to go into battle, to kind of carry out that plan. We see here in Caleb, his actions of being fully devoted to God perhaps allows, God to, there's this relationship between our actions and the spirit that we end up having, I think. Caleb has a different kind of spirit. What kind of spirit? The kind that is courageous, the kind that is going to go into any situation and try to carry out God's will. And that's just a balance between, I don't know if that makes sense, but there's this relationship here between how we are and what God will do with our hearts, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep, Clint? Here, I'll run your mic. There you go. That's all good. It should be on.
Not necessarily along those lines, but in the idea of a different spirit. I think you see Caleb, and you even pointed out in 13:30, he says, let's go up and we can take possession of the land because we can conquer it. But then it almost seems like the more he talks about it, the more confident he gets, because then by the middle of chapter 14, he says, the Lord's with us. He will bring us into this land. Then he says, don't be afraid of the people. It's because we'll devour them. Then he says, the Lord's with us. Don't be afraid. I mean, it's like the more he talks about it, the more he's like, hey, wait, what are we doing? I mean, this is God's given us this. So maybe some of that different spirit is he's one of those guys that has to kind of ramp himself up, and the more he talks about it, the more he encourages even himself, which, to some degree, I think that's kind of maybe a lesson for us that, those times where when you want to do something, when you hear yourself say it out loud, you go, hey, I can do this, so it kind of seems like he takes those steps a little bit.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, good thought. Other thoughts?
Like any good leader, I think that he was gifted with vision, and he had a dream. And those are really great marks of a good leader.
Yeah, it's a good call out. He definitely had a dream. I totally agree with that. Yeah. Also, thinking about what Clint said, and we think about what God said repeatedly to Joshua, be strong and courageous. It doesn't seem like he had to say that to Caleb. Like, he was strong and courageous, but you bring out a good point. Maybe he's also saying it to himself. Maybe he is, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Yep. Thanks, Dave.
For starters, with the comment of our actions and going with God hardening our heart or us being stronger, it makes me think of Revelation where God says, I wish you were not lukewarm, one or the other. And I think in our lives, God does create where you are either cold or hot. And maybe that's sin where he's saying he hardened their hearts. Well, he didn't directly harden their hearts. He said, okay, if you have to pick a side. I'm going to create events, and by the end of it, you will show your side.
Yeah.
That's not really what my comment was, though.
Oh, no, well, that's good. Bonus comment.
I was thinking this whole Caleb has a different spirit, and I had never really connected until you read it that he's the part of the tribe of Judah. And I went back and I read the blessing to the tribe of Judah is that Judah is a lion.
Yeah.
And does that not describe Caleb? He is a lion who is ready. The scepter does not leave his side, is how it's described. And it also makes me think then that God had from the beginning, he was going to save the world. And it is coming through the tribe of Judah. And so it makes you wonder if God intentionally put a different spirit because he needed that lineage to be tough, to make it through in order to finish the promise that he created in Genesis.
Yeah, that's an excellent thought. And you must be looking at my notes for the next lesson because we're going to go to the blessing of Jacob as well. Very good. Tommy. Oh, I think it might be turned off. Oh, Tommy, can you turn on the microphone? There's a little, I should have given it to you. There you go. just hold in for a second?
Okay.
Yeah, very good.
This is kind of a sidebar. When he says, I will give my daughter to the man who captures this. As a father of two daughters, this would not have worked for me. But it kind of speaks to the value, the status of women in that culture. She has no say in the matter. Whoever it is, you will marry him. Good or bad, but that's a common practice in that culture.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. It certainly still shows some value, you know, part of what he's giving. Excellent thoughts. Appreciate it. Okay, next time then on the Conquest, we're going to start looking at the allotment to the 12 tribes. It's easy to get lost in a lot of names of places, and we're going to do more, you know, summary than anything else. But there's a lot of also interesting questions that we can ask and facets to consider. And as we think about that, I'm going to kind of again set the stage. This is a good transition here too. So we see a very elderly man. He may be on his deathbed. His eyes are clouded, probably with cataracts. He's 147 years old, and around him is a group of 12 men. These are his sons, and they're all grown men as well. Maybe one of them walks like an Egyptian. Okay, I couldn't help myself. That's really So this man, he knows his life is coming to an end, and he calls his sons together to bless them. We're going to use the blessing of Jacob in Genesis 49 as an introduction for each tribe's allotment. On a side note, I can't help but hear in my head like a voice of distinction. This is where I get back to if it was a movie, I'd probably put like Anthony Hopkins in this role just to hear him narrate. Some of these blessings are going to be pretty easy to decipher. Judah is a lion's cub. Others are going to be a bit more mysterious. I'll be digging into the commentaries for them and probably still be shrugging. Often we don't think of Jacob as a prophet, but here he's going to tell of the future tribes that are going to grow from his sons. So I hope you will join me next week as we start looking at the allotment of the land. Thank you.